Hello and welcome to the Animation Kimminucation podcast, your source for discussion about animation, film, fandom, and more. So please join your host, I Love Kim Possible a Lot, or KP, and Lauren Kizich, the Abbey Roadie, for today's discussion. If you like what you hear, please remember to support by giving a like, a follow, as well as subscribing to the main I Love Kim Possible a Lot channel on YouTube. Spread the word and keep being a part of a great community. This episode contains some mild adult language.
Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of Animation Kimminucation. I'm your host person, KP. Joined with me is Lauren. Say hi, Lauren.
Hello.
Okay, I'm glad you didn't say hi, Lauren, and be a smartass. And today we
I can
have
be normal.
results may vary. Today we have my good friend Jeremy Whitley. Whitley. There we go. We have my good friend Jeremy Whitley. He's a great guy, really nice guy. He writes comic books and he has his own original line called Princeless, as well as writing for IDW and the My Little Pony spin-offs, and he's writing some new stuff for that, but we'll get into that. Anything I missed, Jeremy? Anything else you do in general?
Mostly I write comics. I write a little bit of everything. I've written for Pony stuff, Marvel, Princeless, and I've got, I've done Sea of Thieves, Vampirella, Rainbow Bright, just about everything at this point.
It's a lot of stuff. That's a lot of IP. Okay, Lauren, take it away. What's going on in Coronavirus Part 3 media time, I guess?
Yeah, so, I'm trying not to date a whole lot of this, but, given that it's a day-by-day thing where there has to be something going on, some interesting stuff has actually gone down. For instance, Bob Iger has taken back CEO responsibilities from newly named CEO Bob Chapek during this coronavirus pandemic. It's not him pulling a Miyazaki and coming back into the CEO position. He's pretty much just taking the wheel for right now and helping Bob Chapek through this time for the company, especially when Iger happened to leave just before this whole thing kind of came down. And so yeah, I don't think Bob Chapek was ready or equipped to handle this quite yet. So he's kind of helping him out.
I'll add, this is for the Walt Disney Company. You forgot about that.
Oh, well, yeah, sorry. Well, I feel like if people are listening to an animation podcast, I feel like people know who Bob Iger is at this point. But yes, to specify for Disney.
You never know. You never know. We're supposed to be teaching people stuff on this, so,
Okay, so for the Disney Corporation, yes.
There you go.
Walt Disney Company, yes.
Oh, that Bob Iger. Okay.
See?
I thought you were talking about that attorney, Bob Iger.
We assume everyone knows, like, voice actors by name and stuff, and then we're just, like, normal people come on here and they're just like, what about that guy? And I'm like, I don't know. It's a guy who does a thing, and then...
You mean that John Delancey?
That old fart man? Maybe cut that. Old man Delancey sometimes. One time I muttered that under my breath, and he was, like, right behind me. It's like, oh, shit. Anyway. That could be a whole episode. We'll shut up.
But, yeah, in the wake of this, it unfortunately means that, that there could be a lot of downsizing in the company, which means, fewer people in the corporation at this point and across the globe. So we'll see what happens in the wake of this whole coronavirus thing. But that just happened. And also what just happened, Smiling Friends, the pilot, aired on Adult Swim the other day. And Smiling Friends, if you don't know, or are not watching Adult Swim at midnight.
I thought Adult Swim only had Rick and Morty, and that's it.
For the big brains.
I'm making a bad joke.
But so YouTubers Michael Cusack and Psychic Pebbles, I'm hoping I'm saying those correctly, I say them as I read them, were both animators off of YouTube, and they both created this pilot together in in coordination with some well-known YouTube voice actors as well. And it surprisingly dropped on Adult Swim. Only, I don't think anybody really expected it, only if people were following their Twitters and they were just leaving hints that something was going to happen on April 1st. Because this was an April Fool's drop, by the way. So yeah, people weren't expecting it, but yeah, in true Adult Swim fashion, it's a surrealistic kind of like uh, hyper, sometimes even in some of the comedies, like hyper realistic in the art style, uh uh kind of comedy show, and it's bizarre, and I did enjoy it because of how bizarre it was. So I hope we get to see more of that show. And then finally, Primal, the hit show from Yendi Tartakovsky on Adult Swim, also surprisingly dropped an episode same night, uh, teasing their upcoming season 2, with a killer, pardon the pun, episode. So if you guys haven't tuned into Primal yet, just to sum it up, you know how you have an adventure between a boy and his dog? Just have a man and his T-Rex surviving the prehistoric world and facing all sorts of dangers together and becoming closer buddies because of it. So, I mean, and that's just a nice way of putting it. It's like a killer show. Highly recommend it if you haven't watched it yet. So, that's so far what I have for animation news.
Yeah, I use the analogy for Primal. It's like the Good Dinosaur, but like more violent, and as Lauren said, actually good, which is fair because I haven't seen the Good Dinosaur because I'm afraid to see the Good Dinosaur. I just know it exists. So, I mean, I totally saw it for that Pixar thing that we did. That, yeah. Anyway, professional.
Cheating on your homework, are you?
I like TV tropes. It's my friend. Anyway, we'll just get to it then. We have a lot of interesting questions prepared for Mr. Jeremy. I think, yeah, Jeremy already gave his thing. Cut this. Okay. Lauren, do you want to ask the questions, or you want me to ask the questions, or does it really matter?
Well, I do want to lead in because I do like to preface every episode with there are always new listeners, and there's always a lot of young listeners, a lot of aspiring artists, writers, entertainers, pretty much anybody that wants to get their start in the industry, whether it be in animation or in comics or in just in general in entertainment, in animation. How about you tell us how you started writing and creating comics? Like, where did you start?
So I went to college for English and creative writing. It wasn't necessarily for comics or I don't know. Writing is weird in I guess most circles because there's not really like a career path. It's just like, all right, you graduate and then it's like, all right, go write something somewhere. Sure. So I started out doing self-published comics. I worked with a friend of mine, Jason Strutz, who is a illustrator, and basically I was writing stuff and he was illustrating, and we were paying to get it printed through a place called Kablam. It's in Florida. Basically, you can order a bunch of your stuff to get printed, and they'll charge you a bunch of money and ship you a box, and you'll probably it is very difficult to make any kind of money that way. But what it did allow me to do is like have some stuff to go to conventions and show off as sort of proof that we could do it. Yeah, we made this thing. Here it is. Hopefully it's okay. Maybe pay us $4 for it. So it's it was a lot, at least a year of that, just going to conventions and having a couple of issues of stuff on the table. And I started working on another comic with my friend Franco, who was illustrating that. And basically, we got one issue of that done, and Franco was like, "Yeah, drawing comics sucks. Like,
drawing is hard."
He's a professional. He's like a professional artist. He does he makes prints and puts stuff up in galleries. And he's like, "Yeah, this takes a lot more time than other types of art, and it doesn't pay as well. So I don't think I'm going to do this anymore." So I was stuck with one issue of that comic that I was taking around to conventions with me and showing off to people. and eventually, like, I went to Heroes Con, which is one of the better comic book conventions. It's in Charlotte, North Carolina. Um, and they sit you at a table next to somebody else who's trying to do the same thing you're trying to do, and you get to hear each other pitch all day. And
I know the feel.
yeah, and we were in sort of a particularly kind of back corner of the convention and not selling much of anything, and the guys next to us weren't selling much of anything either. But one of the guys who was sitting next to us really liked the pitch for the comic I was working on, and he was like, "Yeah, I like what you're doing. The idea is great. I don't really like the art on it. So I would want to set you up with a different artist if my company's looking for some new comics because we're just starting this new comic book company. So we're looking to bring in some outside stuff. You'd be interested." I was like, "Well, good news because my artist already quit, so we don't have to fire an artist." And that was actually, it was the first issue of Princeless that I had with me, and it was a whole, obviously completely different art and different style, but more or less the same book as far as what was written in it. And that was my friend Dave Dwanch, who ended up being one of the founders of Action Lab, and he got me hooked up over there as they were starting, which is where Princeless still is getting made. It's about 10 years now since that first book
Time
came out.
flies.
I was gonna say, where did you get your inspiration for Princeless?
So Princeless was a series I started because it was kind of something I was looking for. Because I was getting ready to have my first daughter, Zuri, and my wife had been talking about. I was looking for something to get her into comics, as a kid. But I felt like at that point, I think it launched about the same month as like the DC New 52 did. So there was very little like content that was designed for women at all. Not to mention, younger women, not to mention young women of color. And I was looking for something where she could see somebody that looked like herself in the comic, and it would be a book that she enjoyed, but could still, teach something, have something of value to it, and there wasn't much in that market. So I started making Princeless with an eye to be the sort of thing I wanted my daughter to read, and I think I found a lot of other people were looking for the same sort of thing.
Yeah, no, that's great because I mean honestly, it's great to see that comics keep growing and expanding and delving into new ideas and new concepts and just opening up the field for so many people and so many new characters.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's really interesting to me because I feel like we have the distinction of being sort of a vanguard in this new wave of comics, but the sort of vanguard that nobody knows about because we were never very big. So it's like we were a couple of years ahead of Kamala Khan, Ms. Marvel, and Lumberjanes and stuff that started coming out a few years later and blew up a lot bigger. But it's nice to see like, oh yeah, I was pretty sure there was room to make this kind of stuff, and eventually the other companies caught up with what we were doing.
Yeah, and I give Jeremy a lot of credit because just something I noticed while being around him, sometimes like I'll sit with him at conventions and stuff like that. Granted, that hasn't happened in a while. But he really tries to incorporate a lot of diversity, not just people of color, but a lot of LGBTQ plus themes. I think I got all of the pluses. And like one year at BronyCon, the BronyCon that I hung out with Jeremy and Jen Blake, we met with one of his pre-readers. I think her name was Rachel too. Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah. So he's like, I think it's admirable that not only are you trying to write these characters correctly, but to the point of trying to kind of have a pre-reader who's giving you feedback about, is it realistic? Like, is this the way people are thinking? That kind of vibe. So Jeremy is a good guy. That's the end of the podcast. No, I'm kidding.
I was gonna say, when did you two meet?
1 year at BabsCon, I noticed Jeremy had a table, and he's like, again, super nice guy. He's probably one of the ones I connected to the best as far as like just the pony people in general, like across the board, whether it be IDW or the voice actors. I used to do conventions with Jen when she was doing pony conventions in general. I think I knew Jen before that, or for a con before that. And so Jeremy wrote one of the I think the first Discord story for IDW, or one of the early ones, and I reviewed it. It was the one with Fluttershy and the CMC.
Mm.
Is I think, I don't know. This was like years ago. I'm sorry. So it's like, hey, I reviewed your thing from on the internet. You want to see it? So Jeremy looked at the video, and then we had conversations about like Discord. My favorite, the good boy, as far as writing him, because this is kind of a thing that happens with when you have multiple writers, when you have a showrunner, where you have and you split them up between specific people. Sometimes characterization can vary, especially in like early seasons of stuff when they're trying to find the beats of the characters.
Mhm.
And Discord specifically has always been a character that, again, depending on the writer, like, is he an asshole? Is he sympathetic? One of the things I really love about like Nick Confalone's scripts, I'm friends with him too. I'm not saying this because I'm friends. Is like, Discord has a lot of different, layers as far as he kind of puts on this persona of like being better than everyone else. But underneath it, he's kind of insecure. He kind of doesn't know what to do. He's afraid people are going to leave him. That kind of thing. And Jeremy, I think, captured that really well in his comic. And it's not something I see a lot. It was the one with Luna in Discord.
Mm.
It's not something the character isn't really explored that thoroughly. It's usually like, we need conflict. Discord causes conflict. Let's put him in the episode. And half the time he's just kind of there to be an asshole. And that's not, as someone who really empathizes with the character, obviously for people who are new to like everything, he's my favorite. It's frustrating to kind of see someone who, or inconsistency in something you care about so passionately about. So we talked about that, and then we hung out a little bit after that, and then for BronyCon one year I was like, hey Jeremy, you're going to BronyCon, right? And he's like, yep. I'm like, can I crash in your hotel room? And he's like, sure. So because Jeremy, the nice guy, cool guy, and so it was me, Jeremy, and Jen at that BronyCon, and that was like one of the funner BronyCons, I think. I had access to the green room, and I got to eat the food, and it was nice. So yeah, I appreciate Jeremy's kindness, and he's helped me a lot. Just like we talk about like good and bad conventions. We haven't touched base in a little while before this, but yeah, that's how we met. Do you want to add anything, Jeremy, to that story?
Yeah. So I had met. So I met. I think we both knew Jen first, because Jen did just done a story with me, and sort of nudged the right people to get me invited to that BabsCon, which I hadn't done any pony conventions at that point, even though I'd done several issues of the comic. And yeah, I believe, I mean, I know for certain that's where we met. That's the first time I actually met Jen in person. And yeah, we got to talking about, I think you had read some of the stuff I had written with Discord, and not others of it. And you were, I seem to remember you being insanely bothered by the fact that something had come out with Discord and you hadn't actually read it.
Yeah.
Because the first story that I ever wrote for MLP was Friends Forever #2, which was Discord and the Cutie Mark Crusaders. I think people were still getting used to the idea that there was a second comic book series at that point. So only like half the people that were reading the main series were reading that. That is fun because I've always liked Discord, and I like writing sort of his complexities. And I think the first, when I was pitching those stories, the Friends Forever were basically kind of team up stories. They were like, all right, pitch us an idea of a pair of characters that you could write a story about that would be, unique.
Hijinks
And I was
ensue,
like, well, yeah. I was like, I want to do something about Discord. Who's an interesting person to pair Discord with? And I was like, well, who's a match for the God of Chaos other than like 3 children? Three wild children that are always breaking and destroying things. At that point, I had actually had my first daughter, and I was like, yeah, man, children are scary. They're much scarier than ancient gods. So yeah, I wrote that story, and then I did. There's the Discord and Luna team up one that's on there as well, and then there's the one in the main series that's Discord and Luna and the Cutie Mark Crusaders all together, where they go inside Discord's head, which was a fun one to write. Those sort of characters always interest me. I like characters that are chaotic one way or another, and have all sorts of power, but also have all sorts of insecurities. I find that the Lokis of the world to be interesting. So yeah, and then BronyCon was coming around, and they invited me for some reason and not Jen, and I tried to get them to get Jen a table in a room, and they were like, well, we can give her space at the table, but we don't have any more rooms to give away. And I was like, Jen can stay with me, like that's not going to be a problem. And then Kippy was like, can I stay with you too?
We'll have a party.
Yeah, it's fine. It's just and then it turns out they put us up in the nicest hotel I've ever even been in, the Four Seasons in Baltimore, which was like, it was super nice. And that was a weird weekend too, because there were also like marches in Baltimore that weekend. And we ended up, did you end up at the My Little Pony, stripping is not the word I'm thinking
the burlesque
of,
show?
but
no, I think I
something
missed
very
that.
close to that. Yeah, the burlesque show.
So for people who don't know and are afraid, the burlesque, I've never been to them, but I know that it is done. But it's basically there's a group that does pony themed burlesque, I guess, and it's everyone's favorite thing.
Yeah.
Like the line for BronyCon was like "cray," and I was just like, no. But I think Jen probably went. That sounds like her thing.
Well, yeah, Jen was emceeing.
Oh yeah, as you do.
Because there were a bunch of us who had been on panels at the convention, and we were all getting ready to head home, and they were like, well, there is a march in downtown, and we cannot get to the hotel, so we want to invite you guys to have like free drinks and come to this event we're having right now, and then we'll get you home after that. And the event was a My Little Pony themed burlesque, in which there was some drinking and some rowdiness and some mostly unclothed pony cosplaying involved. It was a wild night.
And this is kind of outside the norm in general for the pony show. So like if you're thinking about going to a PonyCon, I promise that strippers are usually not included. For the most part, there's.
I was gonna say true story though. A couple years ago? Yeah, a couple years ago. For a friend's birthday, I went and saw a Marvel versus DC burlesque show. So you had all the girls were dressed up. It was like a team of Marvel heroes and a team of DC heroes, all pitted against each other, and plus their counterpart villains. It was actually one of the greatest experiences ever.
Oh, I guess I gotta go to a burlesque show one of these conventions. I'm afraid, but anyway, you were saying, Jeremy.
Yeah, I mean it was very clearly like an adult only kind of thing, very well marked, and in the hotel rather than actually in the convention center. But Jen emceed the joint, so it involved a lot of 4-letter words and a lot of drinking.
That sounds about right.
I guess since we're on the topic of My Little Pony, how did you find yourself in the position of writing for MLP?
That's what she said. Okay.
Well, it was interesting because I had been working on Princeless at that point. That was really the only like big credit to my name, and I went to Denver Comic Con, which has a real focus on like focusing on comics for kids and middle grade readers and stuff like that, and they put myself and Emily Martin, my artist on Princeless, in a row next to all the pony folk. The main series had really just started at that point, so it was just like Andy and Katie and Tony, and one of Tony Fleece's friends was a big fan of Princeless and introduced us, and Tony knew they were looking for some more writers on the comic book series because they were getting ready to launch Friends Forever at that point, and was curious if I knew anything about the show, and at that point I had a 2 or 3 year old daughter, so I knew a lot about the show. Because it was either My Little Pony or Dora the Explorer, and anybody who's had to sit through both shows will tell you that My Little Pony is much more enjoyable.
Yes.
Has much less inane repetition. So it just happened to be the show that like I turned on at one point trying to find some way to get away from Dora the Explorer, and I was like, oh, this is good actually. Like it's funny and well written. And so Tony, hooked me up with Bobby, who's the editor on the series at that point, and Bobby just basically gave me kind of a pitch what kind of stories you want to write. We're looking for the Friends Forever stories at that point. So I pitched him, I think 5 or 6 combinations of characters, and the first 2 we picked were the Discord and the Cutie Mark Crusaders, and then Pinkie Pie and Luna, both of which were, I think, are still 2 of my favorite stories I've done for the series.
Neat.
Yeah, but yeah, I just kept, I finished those 2 and pitched some more, and I've done upwards of 40
wow.
now. Let's see. So I was at 40 before I got to the season 10 stuff. Wow. And even though nobody's seen any of that, I have currently written 7 issues of that.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, I'm at 47 already. So depending on what actually comes out this year, I might hit 50 soon.
Yeah, I remember Jeremy was joking on Twitter about, like, I guess people were sending you their ship preferences via DM or something like that. And as a joke, I sent yes. one because, like, I ship Discord and Celestia, which is pretty dead at this point, really. And then he posted on Twitter, it's like, stop making me ship Discord and Chico. We don't even have the rights for Chico. It's a different IP. And I'm like, oh, Jeremy. Wop wop. So, that's our relationship.
Yeah, I get all sorts of interesting requests about
I bet.
trying to make relationships canon. A whole bunch of us got a whole video recently of a gentleman who was very concerned about one particular relationship being or remaining as he thought canon. But yeah, that's like generally when I pitch stories, canon relationships are very far from my mind. I'm.
I was gonna.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of stories that have been told there, and I'm much more interested in like just trying to find something. Like it's hard to find something that somebody else hasn't already done in the My Little Pony stuff at this point.
Right.
We did get 9 seasons of it. Can you kind of tease a little bit what's coming out as far as for those who are unaware? There's a comic book only version of the next season, even though it's not a season of My Little Pony. Hold on. Come on.
Yeah, it's the unofficial season.
Yeah. So it is. So the way the comic book is generally worked is that the comic and the TV show are sort of co-canon in that stuff in the comic book is canon until the TV show doesn't realize we did something and just writes right over it. And in which case the TV show wins because more people see TV than watch comic or than read comics.
I remember
yeah.
the example you mentioned one time is that in what it was the Make New Friends but Keep Discord, the CMC were kind of like snotty to Discord, and then you were like, people keep on telling me this happened after I wrote Discord and CMC comic, but it's not my fault. So
yeah, it had been like 2 or 3 years after I had written the Discord and CMC comic, in which he has made an honorary member of the Cutie Mark Crusaders, and they all become friends at the end because they're all misunderstood. But yeah, then they totally wrote the relationship very different in the TV series, and I just had to be like, oh, whatever, because that's how it works. The TV show makes a lot more money than any comic book has since the 90s. So, yeah, there's been a lot of little things like that. But now that the TV show is over, basically they have given us sort of the sole responsibility of carrying on the canon of the show. So it was supposed to start with the Free Comic Book Day story, which is supposed to come out the first weekend of May. But of course, Free Comic Book Day is officially been canceled at this point. So who knows when you guys will get that story?
They might put it online, right? Like,
yeah, I mean the books are printed because I have copies of them already, but they were not to be distributed until Free Comic Book Day, and who knows when that's going to happen. But yeah, the basic setup of this is, it comes right off the end of the current, not the future timeline, at the end of season 9. So it continues on with the story from right after Twilight is enshrined as the sole leader of Equestria. Luna and Celestia are leaving, and we took a little bit of a different angle on it, which is part of the driving force of it is to Twilight wants to define her reign by making friends with new lands and having everybody go out and meet new types of creatures and new worlds. So we kind of divide up the main 6, and Twilight has to stay at home because she's the only princess now, so she can't just run around wherever she wants all the time. But the others all get a chance to run off and see some of the worlds that maybe have been hinted at, and some of the things that they've talked about on the show but have never gotten around to showing. And we also get to follow up on some of the continuity from the movie that has not been followed up on because some of those characters that appear in the movie,
yeah, they're expensive to get a hold of. Yeah.
Yeah, Emily Blunt is a little above their pay grade, so great for a movie. Yeah. Not so much for a animated TV show.
Yeah, like all those areas that were explored in the movie. Yeah, if this series going forward explores those areas and gives us, it allows us to go deeper into them, then I'm all for it, because I did hope to see more of that, like seeing more of the sea ponies, and seeing more of hopefully where we see more of the Hippogriff Kingdom and stuff like that. So, I mean, and then plus there's just, do we ever follow up with the pirates? Do we ever follow up with the, like there was a lot that was introduced in the movie that I hope ends up getting covered.
Oh.
Yeah, we mixed a couple of things, both from the movie and from the TV show, with some things that have been introduced in the TV show, which they didn't follow up on or didn't get a chance to follow up on. So we have some of the the pillars of Equestria in there, as well as some of the characters from the movie. I love Tempest. So Tempest is in the group that's in the first story that they've already put out the solicitation for. So it's we can discuss now, though, that they're going to the zebra homelands to actually, see where Zecora is from, and we get some actual background on Zecora, which was never quite covered in the show. But that initial group is Applejack and Zecora and Rockhoof and and Tempest.
I was waiting. I'm like,
so,
you got one.
Yeah, it's a fun group, and the story I'm writing right now it actually follows up directly on some of the stuff from the movie and from the movie prequel, and features my boy Capper.
Yeah.
With his one song.
Because who doesn't love a streetwise cat?
Oh my god, I remember the arguments. Like, I'm getting flashbacks of all my Bruni Dome, and I remember the arguments about, like, how can Capper be bipedal when Opal is established to just be a normal cat that Rarity has? So, I don't know.
How can Rarity have a cat then flirt with another cat?
Yeah. I mean, I've been to anime conventions. I've seen plenty of people flirt with cats that own cats. So
I've been around the block. I've seen things.
We're gonna get into that whole why is Goofy bipedal and Pluto not?
No, who is Goofy's? Who is Max's mother? Like, that's all I want to know.
We don't know, but we assume she ran off with the milkman based on that one short.
Oh, that's like a whole other thing.
Oh, just hopefully it's not Pluto, right?
Oh, don't. I would like not to be scarred.
And I'm sure. I mean, all the teams are in the sort of first issue when that comes out, so you'll get to see who's going where. But somebody's certain favorite mischievous character is in the Capper story as well.
I'm paying attention now. Oh, okay, good to know. I just oh man, I was very bitter about how things ended, and I had a bunch of probably way too many 15-year-olds yelling in my face about, oh, it's canon now, Fluttercord is canon, and you have to deal with it. And I'm just like, no. So I could use some Fluttercordness, just Discord being Discord, please and thank you.
First of all, it's open to interpretation.
Yeah, it was very clearly open to interpretation when the writers of it were just like, I don't know, we didn't do anything on purpose. So same with Applejack and Rainbow Dash, right? And then Twilight and Rarity just kind of exist. They just breathe air. So yeah, if I do one more last thing in ponyness, I'm just gonna keep on DMing Jeremy. It's like I better not see any Fluttercord. I'm gonna come to South Carolina and kick your butt. So
Well, I'm in North Carolina, so you go around and head to South Carolina.
You would end up in the wrong state.
They can't stop me from trying. Oh Lord! But yeah, there you go. Your exclusive look and the pony stuff. I guess if you still care about that, I'm sorry if that's your life right now. But we can talk about how the fandom has changed in general, for ages. But I'm trying to think if there's any other things to cover.
Long story short, everybody go buy the comic.
Everyone stops shipping Fluttercord. Jeremy says it's not canon, even though he didn't say it. By being on the podcast, he's confirming he's doing stuff. Okay. Anyway, Lauren, go ask questions. I'm going to go in my corner now.
Hey, I wrote very easily interpretable comics, both with Discord and Celestia, and Discord and Fluttershy.
Yeah,
so
I remember
I also gave Discord an ex-girlfriend who's a Catwoman from Egypt. So whatever.
Yeah, it's fine. I think that does make a lot of sense though, why he's just so ooh, girls are gross. So, but I don't know. I haven't. To be fair, I haven't read that one in its entirety yet. But I've seen the majority of it at this point because again, people keep on spamming me things. It's been 6 years, guys. It's time to stop. So okay, Lauren. What are the more questions?
Well, I was gonna say, with because you also written for Marvel, um, uh, and so sharing the experience of it seems like there's the spectrum of My Little Pony to Marvel and how they actually interlace in terms of there's a lot of action and adventure. What's your greatest takeaway from writing for both MLP and Marvel?
It's interesting, in some ways they're very different experiences, because Marvel owns all of their characters. So I can come up with an idea that I think is great for My Little Pony, and I can pitch it to my editor at EW, and he can say, "Oh, that's fantastic. We're going to run that by Hasbro, and I'm sure they'll be fine with it, and we'll do it." And then Hasbro can say, no, we don't think so."
Mm.
And it just gets shot down. Or as happened several times when the show was still on, they say, "Oh, it's really close to something we're going to do in the show," or it contradicts something we're going to do in the show. Whereas Marvel, they the comics are primary canon. They get to do what they want. I don't always get to do what I want, but usually I know the reasons. Usually they say, "Oh, you can't do that because of this," whereas Hasbro is often happy just to say, "Oh no, we don't want to."
5 more minutes, Mom.
So
We're going back to bed.
it's an interestingly different experience, but it's also a little less tied to everything else. Marvel's, it's often like you have to slot what you're writing into all the planned events and big things that are going on around the rest of the Marvel universe. I was writing a series called Future Foundation, which is a sort of a spin-off of the Fantastic Four at one point, and I was very excited about this story I was going to write where Rocket Raccoon was going to guest star. I was like, yes, I'm going to have Rocket Raccoon in there, and he's going to be the perfect foil to all these super smart but law-abiding children. He's going to come in and be this sort of chaotic, neutral giant rodent creature. And they were like, "Oh yeah, well, Rocket's going to be dead that month, so probably we shouldn't use him." It's like, what? Yeah, he's dying in Guardians of the Galaxy like the month before this issue comes out, so that's not going to really work. I was like, oh, well, I guess I had better rewrite all of this then.
Back to the drawing board.
Yep.
Or the writing board, I guess.
So yeah, it's writing in the giant knot of continuity that is Marvel, and I assume DC. I've never actually written for DC, but I assume it's very similar there. Is sometimes a rewarding experience and sometimes a sort of harrowing experience, but it's sort of like writing and trying to do a jigsaw puzzle at the same time.
Yeah, so I guess comparatively, Hasbro tends to let you be a little bit more free in writing for them as long as you're pretty consistent with the character personalities and the lore.
Yeah, they're much more interested in, making sure that the characters are consistent. My Little Pony is interesting because there are, several characters who've never really met in the stories or never had any sort of meaningful interaction. So occasionally you can pull out an idea for something and, do a pairing that nobody's ever thought of and do something cool. Like I did a story at one point with Babs Seed and Rarity, which was like literally a pairing I'd come up with by going, what's the weirdest pairing I could do? Like what's two characters you would never see together in a story? And it ended up being this like story about Sweetie Belle was supposed to come hang out with Babs but got sick at the last second, and so Babs ended up meeting up with Rarity in Manhattan, and the two of them have nothing in common, and they have this whole sort of misunderstanding. But they sort of come to this moment of like, yeah, they both have these parents who don't really get them and don't really understand their thing and what their thing is about, and they sort of bond over that and become buddies in that story. And I was like, yeah, I like writing odd couple stories like that.
Yeah, and finding the common ground between characters. But the other thing I was going to say is like parents that not getting their artistic children. Gee, I can never imagine that's a problem. So
Yeah, I like that you can have two different characters and
Yeah, I don't
basically
think
create a
so.
Venn diagram of the two of them, seeing where they would relate to each other despite being so different.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the fun thing with. I mean, Friends Forever isn't an ongoing thing anymore, but that sort of team up setup of this character and that character is really fun and interesting as a way to like as a writing exercise, even if you're just practicing, just writing for fun, is come up with these, find these two characters and like what would they talk about, what would their interaction be, where would they find a connection. I got to write all sorts of interesting stories that way, like Discord and the Cutie Mark Crusaders, or Babs and Rarity, or I wrote a whole story where Luna really wanted to be funny, and it was all about Pinkie Pie trying to teach Luna how to be funny. Um, it's a very amusing story, because that's got one of my favorite recurring gags, which is I almost never write stories in which Twilight is the main character, but I really love writing Twilight bits in other characters' stories. Bits about Twilight being neurotic or not getting it, because Luna just knows that Twilight and her friends are always having fun, so she goes to Twilight for advice on being funny. And Twilight, of course, starts reading her books about how to be funny. And there's a whole meta joke where she's giving her advice, and they do a whole rule of threes thing in the story while Twilight is telling her about the rule of threes.
I love stuff like that.
So I constantly have, I think almost every story I've written with Luna, at some point she ends up in one of Twilight's dreams. And Twilight just has dreams about alphabetizing. She just loves to alphabetize.
It keeps her at peace.
Yeah. Luna likes to go to Twilight's dreams to relax, because it's just sort of this constant droning.
like counting sheep, but the sheep are alphabet numbers, alphabet letters. There we go. Got it.
Alphabet numbers.
Like that's a takeaway quote from this episode. I don't remember what I learned in high school. It's fine.
Gotta count the letters.
I do a draw. That is my skill set. Lauren, you want the next question, or you want me to read the next question?
You can go ahead and use the next question.
I mean, yeah, it doesn't matter too much, but so Jeremy, so for people who want to break into comics in general, whether they be like, teenagers or, kids in college or whatever their place in life is right now, what's your general advice?
I think both the best advice and possibly also the most useless advice is just do it. That's something I've been telling people at conventions for years. Is like there's no comics fairy that is going to come around and invite you to write comics, to tell you that you've been chosen. Hagrid is not going to show up at your door and be like, all right, Harry, you're a comic book writer. It's not going to happen. So like especially if you want to write for a big company like a Marvel or a DC, the only way that they hire people is if those people either have advice or have previous work under their belt, that they have experience, is that word I was looking for, or if they're a minor celebrity. So your choices are clear. Either you can become a minor celebrity, or you can dedicate yourself to self-publishing a comic, or working on a web comic. They're very easy to do on just from a ground level. Like anybody can start making a web comic. A lot of people do start making a web comic. A lot of people don't continue to make a comic. which is sort of the barrier of entry, right? It's like you have to be able to do it and keep at it and keep making stuff, because that's what the world of comics is. There are plenty of miniseries out there, but it'd be very difficult to write a miniseries and then retire from writing it all. You have to keep turning stuff out and keep turning around scripts, and especially if you're going to write for Marvel or DC. I've said several times at conventions, an issue of Spider-Man is coming out. Well, maybe not this month, but every other month. Every month an issue of Spider-Man comes out, and you have to be able to turn around comics on that kind of speed, especially as a writer, if you want to do it. Because if you don't, there are plenty of people who do enough to do it. So getting that experience and figuring out how to do it, and just working at it is the best way to break into it. There's not any sort of minor leagues in comics. There are independent comics, and then there are big corporate comics, but one is not necessarily better than the other, because it's possible to be a Robert Kirkman and write something like The Walking Dead that makes you millions of dollars, and just decide you don't ever want to write for Marvel or DC again. And then it's possible to be somebody who makes comics for Marvel or DC for years, and just at some point they don't want to do it anymore. They're both viable career paths.
That's fair. There was a really good joke that Jeremy said one time where someone asked how do you get rich making comics? Do you remember the punchline for that? It's okay if you don't.
I believe the punchline to that particular one is either you don't, or you write something else.
Oh, basically,
or you be in the 1990s. That is also a possibility.
Close. The punchline was like, so I become a Stan Lee. What's a Stan Lee? Like, is that how you do it? So only Stan Lee, I think, is making, or he was. Rest in peace, Stan Lee. But he was making bank from being in his cameos and co-creating Spider-Man and all the other stuff. But I think in general, a writing career is kind of, you just have to keep at it, and like hopefully you can pay the bills. Shrug, sigh, right?
Such as the creative struggle.
Yeah, I think the hardest thing that you can want to do as a writer is get rich, because there's a big step missing in there somewhere. It's that old, like, write something ? Make money. Like, you got to figure out what that question mark is, and that is actually where my favorite joke I tell on panels comes from. It's not so much a joke as a truth, and that when people ask how you break into writing comics, and I think I stole this from Matt Fraction. Breaking into comics is like breaking out of prison. Everybody has to do it a different way, and once somebody gets in, they block up that entrance, so you have to find a different way.
That's fair. I mean, it also comes down to like the Hollywood rule of like, it's not, it's who you know, as far as if you want to break into a big company from like DC or Marvel. But like independent stuff is very easy to accomplish, and I think starting and going to local conventions where the table prices aren't too high, and getting some prints and selling the prints at like $10 or whatever is just kind of a good place to start. And I see a lot of, I don't personally sell comic books on the vendor floor for conventions, but I know people, like tons of independent comic book writers that or artists, or a mix of whatever, and they just go to show and sell their work, and they go to the next show. So
yeah, I wouldn't recommend starting by having a table. I'd recommend like finding a couple of good comic conventions near you and going to them and talking to people at the show, going to panels and asking questions that you might have that come up, and just seeing kind of what everybody's doing and what it's about. And maybe bring some samples of your work with you if you're an artist, or have a self-published comic that you can give to editors or share with, people you think you might, want to do what they do and might be able to give you advice. And then, go to a couple conventions like that first. And once you have enough stuff, enough prints or comics to, theoretically be able to pay for your table, then, then start getting tables. Because there's nothing more discouraging than doing it the way I did it, which is like, all right, I have one $4 comic that cost me $3 to print. Now I'm going to spend $500 on a table. And if I sell everything I brought, I'm still going to lose money.
Yep.
Oh my god, that's a feel. I don't think you've seen this lately. But my business strategy is, so I have my banners with my brand stuff, and I have like a Kim Possible table, like tablecloth thingy-a-bob, and people see all the pink and all the ponies, and they're just like, oh, I don't like that. And so then I yell at them. I'm like, hey, do you want to buy some shit? And usually they'll stop and either laugh or they'll just like, I've had people just like, I don't even want to buy anything. Here's $10 just for that pitch. And I'm just like, hey, thanks. So you kind of have to find creative ways to stand out at bigger shows, especially. But making sure you have a vast array of products is probably also a good place to start. But yeah, Jeremy's advice is much more well-rounded than just going in and spending money and hope nothing bad happens. Especially if you don't have pre-readers, if you don't have people that are looking at your stuff before because there's a million things that you think you got, and then someone else, feedback is a good thing in general. So
Yeah, I mean, spending $20 to $50 to get into a convention as an attendee is much less expensive than, and possibly sharing a room with a bunch of other people who are going. It's much less expensive than paying for your own room plus paying for a table plus having to ship a bunch of stuff to whatever convention you're going to or drive the stuff. So it's helpful to try it out and sort of see what other people are doing and figure out where the holes are in your strategy before you throw everything, in your suitcase and, realize at the airport that your bags can only be 50 pounds a piece and you're going to have to pay, $200 just to get your bags to Denver or wherever you're going.
That's a feel. Oh, we can do a whole episode about vending and like what to do and what not to do. And please take Southwest because two check bags for free under 50 pounds. There's my trick. Okay. What are the other questions then? So I guess we talked about a lot making pre-existing IPs as far as pitching ideas to the company, and they'll be like, nah, or they'll be like, oh, that's cool, you read an outline. So like, what goes into a comic outline specifically, and I guess what are the do you have any personal things you do? Do you like kind of break it down and then write, or do you just straightforward, or like how do you do it / what are good ways to do it in general?
A lot of my stuff, I kind of start out with characters, which is probably not the easiest way to do it, but it is like characters are what I care about. Like they're what I enjoy writing. Plots are great, but if you don't have characters that people connect to, they're not worth having. So I often start with the concept and the characters and sort of work my way out from there. I think the biggest thing to keep in mind when you're pitching stuff, whether it be comics or movies or TV or whatever, is that it's not pitching stuff to a company that's going to buy it is not the same as doing the commercial you might do for somebody you want to read a book or watch a book or watch a TV show, and that you have to tell them the whole story. You have to tell them where it begins, what happens in the middle, and where it ends, because they're not going to buy a story from you generally with just a really rough concept, especially if you don't have a proven track record of working on stuff. So it's very rare for a company to be like, oh, that's a great idea, we're going to pay you money for that right now, and then you can you can make that for us later. You have to, say, all right, I know where I'm going. This is roughly how long the thing is that I'm looking to make. This is, how many pages or how many issues. Here is the whole arc of the story. Here are the important character beats. But also you need to be able to summarize what your story is about in like a sort of a quick and catchy way, that can catch somebody's attention, because once you say, like, once you get somebody hooked and they say, all right, tell me more about this, then you can dig into sort of your big elaborate 5-year plan. But you have to have that person listening first. If you just launch in and you're like, all right, so there's this guy named John, and John is from New York, and John has been a carpenter for the last 5 years, but they're not interested. They need something that you can say, all right, it's like this and this. It's this sort of spin on this thing that or for Princeless, it's I've been pitching that book for 10 years to people at conventions. So it's about a princess who's locked away in a tower by her evil parents, decides to save herself instead of waiting around to be saved. So she teams up with her guardian dragon and goes off on a quest to go save her sisters, who are all locked away in towers as well.
There you go. And that's how you sell.
And that's it. But then you do need to be able to have an and then if you're talking to a publisher, so that you can say, all right, it's going to be this story and then this story and then this story, which I didn't completely have with Princeless. So I'm a bad example, but it's very difficult to sell a company on, to sell most companies on sort of an ongoing style series that doesn't have an end point that's known, because most comic sales, like a lot of TV shows, they spike at the very beginning, and often the audience will dwindle after the first couple of issues. So they need to be able to know that there's going to be stuff to hook people, and it does feasibly have an end point where you can get to the story and be finished, and they can package it and sell it as a book as well.
Get invested in the story, and then the author disappears, or you don't know what's happening next, and it's just like, I think it's a shame that the writing, the story isn't developed enough where there is an ending, because it just kind of leaves the whole experience incomplete, and it's hard to get invested in something that you don't know when the ending will be, not maybe if there will be an ending. And that happens a lot too with canceled TV shows where, there probably was an ending in mind, but because the TV show in general wasn't making money, then they just had to cut it. And then it's just kind of that feeling of, just general sadness and just curiosity. And, I think Hey Arnold is a great example for animation in general, and they actually finished it. Yay. I think a year ago, 2 years ago, whenever the Jungle movie came out. But and I think, with the rise of Netflix in general, I think in streaming services in general, TV shows are being pitched as a more serialized package, like with an end in mind, versus just kind of like, well, do a first season and see how it goes, and then the second season, and then they kind of have to write the story depending on how many seasons or one season they're being greenlit, and that will affect the quality, versus just knowing, oh, they have 52 episodes, make a show, but also this is how much you have till your ending period, kind of thing. So I think it's overall improving the quality of TV. But anyway, I'm on a tangent. Anyway,
no, I think
go ahead.
I think the third issue of any story is the hardest to write, right? Because you know what the first issue is, what the last issue, be it the 4th or 5th or 60th issue is.
Mm-hmm.
If you're any good in writing your first issue, you end in some kind of cliffhanger or thing that's going to get somebody to come back for the second one. So where the second one starts at least. But then you get to that third one and you're like, what goes in the middle here?
Mm-hmm.
What is the fluff in this story? And the problem is when you don't know what that is, and it is just fluff, and somebody reads that third issue and they don't come back for the fourth one.
Yeah. A lot of times, like writers or story people in general, directors, whatever, mostly writers, I guess, script writers, but they focus a lot on, defining specific characters that they might not have had time for, just like to get the plot going, and like the breather episodes or the lower deck episodes, I think is the trope is called. But anyway, Lauren, do we have any more questions, or do you have any general questions?
I guess one more question I do have is what for all of the writers and artists that want to get into this, what is some other advice you'd like to offer young creatives who want to develop their own stories and their comics?
Yeah, and not necessarily just comics, but also just, storytelling in general.
Yeah, I think, I touched on this a little bit, but I think the biggest thing is you can't wait around for permission to tell your story, and you can't tell a story that you think other people might like. Like, don't chase what seems like it's going to be a hot thing or a fad or whatever like that. But like most of the stuff that gets super successful is stuff that people are invested in, that, this is the story that you want to read, that you want to tell. Because if it is something that, if it's a TV show that ends up going, several seasons, or a comic book series that runs long, or even, a movie that, that it takes a lot to write anything of that length. And if you want to, if you start writing it or working on it thinking, oh, this is going to be a thing that's popular, then, at some point you're just going to get tired of writing it. The biggest thing is to write the story that you want to see, because at the very least, if that's the case and you make a story and it's the thing you want, it's at least something you can be proud of at the end of the day, and you can use as a piece of your portfolio to say, this is the kind of thing I make. So even if it isn't successful, you can have a thing that you're proud of and you can use to get more work, rather than having half of a thing that you were like, well, when I started writing this, it seemed like these movies were doing really well, so
vampires were the thing.
I wrote a movie like that. Yeah. You don't want to be the third Snow White movie that comes out in a year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was gonna say with
it's a good way to put it.
It's make when you're writing your stories, to like take from even my own experience, write about things that you enjoy, write about the things that make you happy, write about the things that inspire you, because if it's not really genuine, it's just kind of like it'll fall flat and people will know it. And I feel like we've kind of, in a way, we touched on this point kind of before, but yeah, it's got to come from a place where it's genuine, like you genuinely care about these characters, the story, the world you've created. Otherwise, people can tell when you're trying to do it for profit, when you're trying to do it just to do it because it's a fad. They can tell. So it's like when you put your all into something, that's when the real good stuff comes out, and that's when people will look.
Yeah, if you sit down to write an issue or an episode or a piece of the story, and all you can think is like, God, I can't wait for this to be over, and the person that's watching or reading that is going to think the same thing at that point. Like, you've got to be, excited to be like, okay, where did I leave this off next time? Oh, right, we're at this point. Like, let me jump into that, and I can't wait to write this part, or this scene where this happens. You should always be excited about the thing you're writing. You should never be dreading it, because it's going to come through.
I do remember that I did submit a piece of fan fiction in my college application, and it was part of the reason I got in, because they wanted to see storytelling capabilities, and they could tell it was a story I like to write, and I had fun writing it. So they're like, yeah, sure.
What was the story about?
It was very tame. It was like a Christmas story. So I mean, it was just like,
oh, okay.
it was just one. I'm like, I was in the Christmas spirit and I wanted to write it, and they're like, yeah, sure.
Lauren, stop pitching people your Lion King fan fiction. God damn it.
Then you get me thinking about those sexy anthropomorphic Lion King characters that were going around the internet for a week there.
Those were neat, though.
Yeah,
those were neat. I liked them.
Yeah, neat. A little uncomfortable, but
they weren't naked.
Neat.
that time.
I mean, that Mufasa was a little bit disconcerting.
You mean the sexy
So,
Professor Mufasa kind of?
yeah, the zaddy Mufasa.
The Zaddy Mufasa. That's it, guys. That's the word.
Yeah, that was a lot. But yeah, like I think, I think a lot of people are down on fan fiction for various reasons. Some deserved and some not. But I think some of the greatest stories come from fan fiction, come from people watching a show or reading a series and going like, ah, man, they really screwed up. Like, if I were telling this sort of story, it would go like this. Because that's, I mean, whether they would ever admit it or not, I mean, that's 90% of fantasy stories post J.R.R. Tolkien, right? Is people like borrowing pieces from Lord of the Rings or later Dungeons and Dragons and going, all right, well, this is the kind of story I want to tell with these type of characters. But those archetypes the archetypes of elves have not changed drastically since Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Everybody's writing fan fiction.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, whatever gets you going, and you can bleed into original stuff if you think you're ready, but whatever kind of tricks your mind to be like, I can do this thing if I'm talking about this thing. Like, I doubt I would have made all my Little Pony content, or been as passionate about it if it wasn't for Discord and talking about Discord and making fun of myself on the internet. And, also, like, I don't think people would have found me because I don't think, my voice would have been as clear when I was just starting out making fan content. But yeah, anyway, I think I'm good. Lauren, do you have any more questions?
I think I'm good too, actually. And again, it seems like any other questions that seem to be coming up in my mind, they already got answered. So I'm like, so good.
Okay, Jeremy, anything you want to add before we wrap up?
Nope, I think I'm good.
Did you have a good time?
Yes,
Cool.
absolutely.
How about you rate us 5 stars and
Oh, shut up, Lauren. Anyway, so Jeremy, where can people find your stuff if they want to read things?
Well, I've got links to all of my stuff on my Twitter. It's at jrome58. That's JROME 58. Or if you'd rather stay away from Twitter, which is probably better for you, my website is jeremywhittley.com. All of my stuff is available to buy at local bookstores and definitely searchable on Amazon. Go find it there, and then transfer that information over to your bookstore and buy it there.
Yeah, what else are you gonna do? Everything's closed. So well,
Yeah.
thank you.
Read.
Go read, damn it. Yeah, I forgot one more point before we end for reals. I was just gonna add, as far as the storytelling, and I forgot it, is watch things, I think, because I think in general people don't people need guidance to, like, for things like story structure, like what kind of characters they like and how they can facet that and use that as a learning tool. So I'm like telling people, just consume a lot of media, a lot of good media, and then you can kind of say, oh, it worked here, what if it worked here? So but yeah, that was my quick thing.
I think that is especially true for comics and animation, because I think there are a lot of people that start making making something for one of those two medium, thinking, oh, well, this is a lot easier to get into than movies, and I can use this as a sort of starting point for whatever bigger project I want to do. And it turns out they don't read comics, or they don't watch enough animated content, and their stuff blows, and then they don't make anything.
Or worse yet, like as Jeremy said, like you don't want to be the third Snow White. You don't want to write a story and spend all this time writing a story if it's already been done in a big format, or if it's been done in a very similar way, then people are going to be like, oh, it's a ripoff of this thing, even though if you had no idea about that thing. So I know movies in general, their schedules and as far as release dates and stuff will be switched around depending if something else is coming from a different studio that is similar, and then competition is a thing. So movie politics, yay. So Anyway, go watch some good stuff. It should. I mean, you have Netflix, right? You have Netflix, Disney Plus. I'm constantly recommending Disney Plus because I think it's gonna really change how Disney is redistributing its material and have some flexibility with its storytelling and blah 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 blah.
Yeah, go watch New DuckTales.
Yeah, New
Yes.
DuckTales is really good. I've been watching it too passively. I think I gotta rewatch and pay more attention. But yeah, thank you again.
Della Duck is my hero. She's the best.
Oh my gosh, I do miss David Tennant is a good Scrooge, but I do miss old school sounding Scrooge. That's my only nitpick, but that's just a personal preference, really.
Yeah. I love Tennant as Scrooge. He's great. I love that all the nephews have unique personalities in this version, which is
Yeah,
great.
I think that's something that was super needed if the story was gonna, become more, dynamic than just like it's like the twin, or it's like I always think of the Beauty and the Beast like chicks that like Gaston, but they're like the same thing, but they're just wearing different colors.
You mean the Bimbettes?
Mm-hmm.
Is that what they're
Yes,
called?
they are actually called that.
Okay. Is like, how do you know that, Lauren? Are they like listing the credits as like the Bimbettes or something?
Yes, and also just like canonically, people have referred to them, like artists have referred to them as the Bimbettes. So you got that going.
All right, we learned something new today. And they're also parodied in that one Big Mac episode where
with Justin Bieber Pony.
With Justin Bieber Pony. It's like Heartbreakers, or it's something with Big Mac and Sugar Bell or whatever. I don't know. Go look it up. I'm sure I reviewed it and I forgot about it. But anyway, thanks again, Jeremy, for coming.
The ringing endorsement.
Thank you, Jeremy.
I'm glad to do it.
You've
Thank
been
you.
great and fun, and I'm glad this all worked out. And then for new people, we come out with new episodes every Wednesday, 6 p.m. Eastern for like the podcasty version, and then 4 p.m. Eastern usually for the YouTube version, which is basically the same exact thing, but it's on YouTube and it has like this cool looping graphic that we have. That's new of this recording. Yay, we fancy. So if you absolutely can't wait, then just go on SoundCloud or something. There's no difference except YouTube is easier to link people and have people understand, and it's free, and yay. All right, and then, follow me, follow Lauren, follow Jeremy, subscribe on YouTube, and we'll see you next week. Please come back next week, and if you're new, please watch the old episodes and then come back next week. All right, thanks again for listening, everyone, and have a good rest of your day.
Bye, y'all.
Thank you so much for listening to Animation Kimmunication on YouTube, Spotify, or your favorite podcast provider. We are really hoping this show makes a difference in how people view animation and media, as well as giving and providing advice for people all over the world who like or want to join the animation or media industry. If you liked what you heard, please remember to subscribe and rate those 5 stars, as well as tell your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our main YouTube channel, I Love Kim Possible a Lot, and turn those notifications on. My name is Scribbler, and you have been listening to Animation Kimmunication.